Welcome and thanks for tuning in to the Victorian Aboriginal News Van Talks podcast. I'm your host, Charles Parkiner.
Victorian Aboriginal News acknowledges and pays respect to traditional owners and custodians across Australia. We acknowledge the elders who have gone before, those who currently lead their communities, and those who will follow in years and generations to come.
On the 17th of July this year, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria declared to the Independent Treaty Authority that it was ready to enter into negotiations with the Victorian Government for a statewide treaty. Now, while the intent is there, under the terms of the guiding document, the Treaty Negotiation Framework, it is the Assembly's responsibility to satisfy the authority that it has met certain standards. Joining me today is a key member of the Treaty Authority, Yorta Yorta man, Uncle Andrew Jacomos. Uncle Andrew, thanks for speaking with me today.
My absolute pleasure.
Uncle, there is a period extending up until the 17th of September, 2 months after the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria lodged its intent, for members of the community to lodge either a comment or dispute in relation to the Assembly meeting specific standards and therefore satisfying the authority that it is indeed ready to enter into negotiations with the state government. First of all, just what are these standards that we're talking about?
So there are 4 standards, and these standards are as noted in the Treaty Negotiation Framework. And the 4 standards relate to the lands and waters over which it intends to negotiate a treaty.
Yep.
How the Assembly is representative of all First Peoples community in Victoria. What are the processes in place for the Assembly to choose its negotiators and make decisions related to treaty? And the 4th one, what are the processes in place to uphold cultural authority and to consult with and educate First Peoples in Victoria?
Okay, so there's a call for either a comment or dispute. What's the difference?
The difference is that a comment can be made by a person or an organisation that relates. It could be a suggestion. It's where they might wish to have dialogue with the Assembly about seeking an outcome. Comments can be both positive or negative or a combination. Whereas a dispute is where the commenter is seeking resolution to an issue that they have raised, and potentially where they have sought the assistance of the treaty authority.
In other words, they're saying that the Assembly has not met those basic standards, and it may be in that leadership or diversity, or it may be a contentious issue with regard to the land and waters over which the Assembly is seeking to negotiate.
So it needs to relate to one of the minimum standards.
Right.
And how they see that the Assembly hasn't satisfied the minimum standards. Now, the Assembly's response to these minimum standards are on our website. They're on the website of the authority, and everybody, whether you're First Peoples or not, can go onto the website to read them, but it's only First Peoples who can actually make a comment or a dispute.
Let's just clarify this, because I know that every election, well, the 2 elections that have been held for the First Peoples Assembly Victoria, there has always been confusion as to, well, who's allowed to enrol to vote. There's always this confusion that it's just Victorian traditional owners, but that's not the case. Now, I just want to clarify this. The people who can lodge a comment or dispute with the Treaty Authority are any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people living in Victoria or who are traditional owners. Is that correct?
Correct. And the traditional owners who may be living elsewhere, Victorian traditional owners who may be living. So all First Peoples, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who live in Victoria can lodge a comment or can lodge a dispute, and those traditional owners from lands now known as Victoria, wherever they live, New York, Broome, can also make a comment or a dispute.
Is there a requirement that for non-traditional owners that they have lived in Victoria for a certain period of time? Because that's what it is in order to enrol to vote with the Assembly.
No, there's not.
As long as you are a resident of Victoria...
As long as you're a resident of Victoria, you can lodge a dispute or comment.
Now, you mentioned before that it can be negative comments.
Yes.
Now, that brings up something, and it's a little bit quirky, I know, but I did have a bit of a giggle when I saw that the lawyers had been to this document and we had the term vexatious. So comments can't be vexatious. Can you just explain what's classified as a vexatious comment?
So a vexatious comment is where it may be of a personal nature. It's not grounded in truth, where it's seeking to cause trouble, where there's more ill intent than there is positive outcome sought.
So in other words, leave that to Facebook, but not on the treaty authorities.
Yes. Okay. And can I suggest, for people with negative ideas, stay off Facebook as well on social media.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Worst thing in our community, in the broader community, but particularly in our community, is negative, particularly young people.
The other thing is that I've noticed that you've mentioned both here and in the documents that it's not just an individual who can lodge a comment or dispute, but it's an organisation, and I would assume also collectives of people, such as gathering places. Can you just expand on that a bit for me?
So, as we said, any First Peoples in Victoria, or traditional owners elsewhere, as well as in Victoria, any Aboriginal ACCO gathering place, trust, a Friendlingham, Lake Tyers Trust can lodge a complaint, can lodge a dispute or comments. So there's nothing in there that precludes that. So as well as it's also possible for groups of people to lodge a complaint.
So when we're talking about a dispute, and we're just going to focus on disputes right now, not that we're focusing on the negative, but frankly, unless people come in and say, well, hey, it's great stuff, like to see it going, which is a comment, disputes are going to be those areas where the treaty authority is going to have the most amount of work cut out for it. And obviously those are the things that determine whether the Assembly is eligible, in your eyes, to negotiate a treaty. But how detailed does a dispute need to be? Now, what if someone came on and said, well, you know what, I don't believe that the Assembly represents the appropriate diversity or the true diversity of Aboriginal Victoria. Do they then need to go in and truly explain it, or is there another process which can help them in that?
So if they offer it as a dispute, and even as a comment, our staff here would, for every comment or dispute that comes in, we'll go back to them and seek clarification of any outstanding things that need clarification. We'll talk them through our processes. We'll also ask them if there's anything unclear, what are the issues. If it's a dispute, we'll also ask them, have they tried to resolve this prior to coming to us? So there may be cases where they have a dispute with the Assembly or a traditional owner group, and they come to us with that dispute. We would say to them, have you gone through the dispute resolution processes within the Assembly before you've come to us, within a traditional owner group before you've come to us?
So that's obviously something that you would be encouraging, that if there is a dispute with the standards from the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, that they approach the Assembly themselves.
I think that's a healthy approach where we try to resolve it before a third party comes in, such as us. I think in our dispute resolution processes, we first hope that, and we would promote that it's an informal process where they talk between each other, between the parties, come and stand and break bread and talk and find a resolution. It may be just a communication understanding, and then there may be a more formal where we sit down with them. But our first approach is always to see, have they sought to resolve it before coming to us?
I notice that there is a requirement for people lodging comments and disputes that they identify themselves, and that's a prerequisite there. What if there is an individual who has a decent reason not to be identified in a dispute, similar to depersonalisation of submissions to URUC, for example?
Sure. All people have the right not to identify themselves in a dispute. But if they do so, then we can only proceed on that as a comment.
Right.
So we can pass along, but we can't resolve it if they're not able or willing to identify themselves on it as a dispute. We will definitely pass it on.
But obviously no further actions can be followed up with the individual if they're not going to be identified.
Yes.
What's the process, though, if there is a legitimate dispute? Let's say, for example, 3 or 4 people come in online or via the telephone, and we'll talk about methods by which disputes and comments can be lodged in a short while. But what if there was a clear indication that one of those 4 standards wasn't being met? just what does the treaty authority do rather than just pass these concerns on to the Assembly and maybe have a yarn with those people lodging the disputes?
So first of all, we would seek to understand what the dispute is. We would then contact the First Peoples Assembly about it, and we have regular days each week leading up to the 17th of September where we provide any new comments or disputes coming in. But we would start a more informal, or maybe a more formal, where we have a yarn and circle, where we sit down with them to understand, where we bring in the First Peoples Assembly, potentially, to sit down to try to work it out. That is always our preferred option.
What's the true power of the treaty authority when it comes to this? Because quite often we see these organisations set up and they're nothing more than paper lines, no real teeth. What true power does the authority have over granting or otherwise the Assembly permission to go ahead and start negotiating statewide treaty?
If we go back to the first part of your question, absolutely at all times our preference is to work through any dispute. If we can't find a resolution, then the authority has the ability under the negotiation framework to make a decision, to make a final determination. But this is always our last resort, is to go to find a resolution. So the real power of the authority is to actually bring people together. That's our first plan, is bring people together to find common ground between parties. There are limited opportunities for us to make a final determination. There are very limited, and they are the exception.
While the Treaty Authority and the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria have agreed to that 2-month period for disputes and comments, 17th of July to 17th of September, does the Treaty Authority have the power to extend this if it sees fit? Now, obviously, this would be worst case scenario, but does that power exist there?
We have negotiated a 2-month window with the Assembly up until the 17th of September. We believe that is quite adequate time to provide a comment or dispute. We will respond to it, but we need to receive them by the 17th of September.
Well, big question is, of course, how do people actually lodge a comment or dispute? Because they can do it online or over the telephone.
So people go to our website, the Treaty Authority. They will find the form there of which they can complete. When it's lodged and we receive it, we'll respond to it. People also have the option to, if they don't have access, to call us and we can take down the comment or dispute over the telephone. But even if people wish to talk to us about how they make a comment or dispute, call us. We have a team of workers here, all First Peoples, who can take those comments down and respond. If people are feeling uneasy or they wish to talk through, please call us.
So, and that's an important thing too, because it will come back to that issue of not wishing to be identified, because quite frankly, we understand the politics that goes on within the Aboriginal community in Victoria, and it can be quite problematic at times. If someone were to ring up and say, look, I've got this particular issue, I don't wish to be identified, can we just yarn about it? Can the authority guarantee depersonalisation of information at that initial stage of contact, just the yarns?
Absolutely. Guarantee it.
Okay. Now, obviously...
And I just wish to put in there that the authority is absolutely independent. We're independent of government and we're independent of the Assembly. That is central core to the work of the authority. For us to be successful in our work, we have to be independent of traditional owners, of the Assembly and of government.
We will be providing all the information, the contact phone number and the website addresses in order to lodge a comment or dispute on the Victorian Aboriginal News website to accompany this interview with Uncle Andrew Jacamos. And on that note, Uncle Andrew Jacamos, once again, thank you so much indeed for coming onto the program.
My pleasure, and thank you for the T-shirt.
For a full transcript of this interview, visit the Victorian Aboriginal News website at vicaboriginalnews.com.au. Until our next episode, stay safe and stay informed.